So, what occurred to me that I wanted to share with people was that the conference that we're holding in Sydney on the 19th will have information on developmental trauma, on dissociation, and new thinking about those issues not be heard before. And that we want them to come if they want to hear new approaches to the conceptualization of dissociative disorder. The leading researcher, she doesn't like me to say this, but the leading researcher in the world on dissociation will be joining. The co-creator of DBR will be there, and I will be there talking about neurofeedback and dissociative identity disorder. So we really hope that people will join us for what should be a fabulous workshop.
Sebern, what would be so different from any other talk that you think people who come to our workshop will be able to hear?
Well, first of all, the latest research, because you have the researcher, right? So that's Ruth Lanius' work that's groundbreaking. And it's groundbreaking in the three therapies that are what we'll be talking about. Finding solid ground, which is Bethany Brand's approach to working on the internet with people with DID. Neurofeedback and the research she's done with neurofeedback for dissociation. And then we have DBR, deep brain reorienting, and its particular understanding of the dissociative dilemma. And you go hearing that from the co-developer of DBR. So I think this is a very unique, I hate we put very and unique together, but it's a unique opportunity to talk with people who are on the ground with this. And even though Ruth won't be there in person, she is incredibly available and will answer questions in real time on through Zoom. So we hope that everyone who really feels they need to think differently and maybe practice differently with dissociation should come.
I really expect that our audience, our participants will get a lot from your workshop. What I saw when I look at the agenda is that we really will have combination of research finding, neuroscience of dissociation, and then to hear from clinicians who were working with people with dissociative problems for years. So what I would like to see is how, between you and Jess, how you will weave that story that will really resonate with clinicians on what all of this really means for our clinical practices. Because we go to so many workshops and we hear brilliant speeches, so neuroscience-based and research-based, but then you go back to your practice and say, then what? So what do you think would be very practical application of what people hear at the workshop that they can bring back to their practices?
Well, for those already doing neurofeedback, they'll get some more insight into why and how it might work with dissociative patients that they may not be using it for and how they combine that with trauma psychotherapy, with psychotherapy for trauma. They're intricately, the calming the brain is the first step, and it's best done with neurofeedback. And then there's the interesting issue and compelling issue of shock. In a lot of ways, it feels to me that we should be calling PTSD post-traumatic shock reaction, right? Because shock is fundamental to the experience of trauma in general and absolutely in dissociation. You can't have suffered dissociation and not have suffered severe shock. this is what Jess has developed in the hypothesis with Frank Corrigan, Jessica Christie-Sands, who will be presenting at this conference. She and I will be in conversation on a case that I'm going to present through a video of a young woman who was severely dissociative, severely self-harming, and who talks to Bessel on a videotape about why and how it was so different once she started doing neurofeedback. So and I don't show that video a lot. So I hope people will come just to see it, and we will spin off from that. We will talk about why I think that neurofeedback was so important for her. She will also talk about why she thinks neurofeedback is so important for her. And then why I think that DBR is also important in the treatment of trauma. And that's going to be a lot of the workshop. So the research, the clinical use of neurofeedback, and the deep brain reorienting, which is a deep therapy for trauma and dissociation. It was, after all, I mean, Frank Corrigan, the first person to really look into the brainstem and the brainstem response to early shock, was looking particularly at attachment shock. So the shock of broken attachment. So we'll also be focusing on attachment shock as a very specific kind of problem and how to address that. It's a core issue in developmental trauma. It's a core issue in dissociative disorders, and we'll be looking at that and how to work in treatment with attachment shock.
That would be such a delight. I really think that our participants will learn a lot from this workshop. What I'm also excited about, Sebern, is that we recorded demonstration with Frank, and one of our colleagues who kindly accepted to be his patient for the day really benefited a lot from one-off session. But what we are hoping also to get during the workshop is we will screen this demonstration and then for Jess to comment on each step of the process, because that's the best way to learn. Yeah. And just looking Frank in action, it's for on its own the most didactic way of learning DBR, more than what we can get from any talk. So yeah. I really think that would be additional bonus that we'll give to our participants.
I've watched Frank do a number of demos, people he's never met before, as was the case here, histories he's not heard, and he doesn't make any prior assumptions, except that shock is always an issue and you have to get to shock. I mean, that's really that's the core of the treatment process. And I've teased him in public about the fact that I don't think he's ever worried about doing these demos, because they always help people. And I'm glad that he has not broken his string, because if he is able to do that again, I'm not surprised. And it's absolutely phenomenal to watch this unfold. And I agree with you, the very best way to get a sense of how to do DBR. And then you need to, as is true with neurofeedback, you need to be trained in it. Right? But yeah, I mean, but there are new frontiers opening here in terms of treatment of trauma. And this is the workshop to learn these new approaches and these, which I think are really breakthrough treatments for the most severe trauma disorders.
And maybe just for the end, Sebern, how do you think and what do you think about the integration of neurofeedback in DBR? Because that's part of our talk, and that's what we will talk about during our Neurofeedback Summit. What are your thoughts at this moment, and what would you like our participants to get as a message when they come for a workshop?
I don't want to overwhelm people because they're two new therapies, but my hope is, and I think it's reasonable to hope, that combining neurofeedback and DBR is the future of trauma treatment because it's successful. I think that fundamentally what's happening is that shock disrupts the biorhythmic nature of the person who becomes the patient. The attachment shock being the worst of all because there's no mother there, or the mother is unavailable in some very profound way, and there's shock to the nervous system that expects the infant's nervous system expects a mother. Though there are all kinds of shocks that are possible, but the most important ones are attachment shocks anywhere along in the early trajectory. So shock, we have to find a way to get to shock. But shock sets up kindling in the brain, emotional kindling of primary affects, so that people lose self-regulation. They can't regulate themselves. And neurofeedback allows for a regulation of the nervous system in its most fundamental, capacity. Siegfried Othmer once said the brain is devoted to its own regulation. It has to be. So what we are doing is figuring out with the neurofeedback is what this nervous system needs to help regulate itself. So we'll be talking about all of that at this workshop, and that it may prepare people for DBR. It may be standalone for a lot of people that won't need to do DBR as well. DBR can be standalone for people as well. So, but these two therapies, I think, together are the, for me anyway, the hope of trauma treatment in the future, in the very near future, in the present. And that's what's going to be presented at this workshop.
This is amazing, Sebern. It really is groundbreaking work. And I'm so happy and I'm so glad that you're coming and that Jessica is coming as well, that we'll have a Ruth there. It's such an important workshop for us in Australia that, as we don't often have this opportunity to see all of you together. But thank you for coming.
Well, you're very welcome. And I would say that, the other thing that's nice is that Jessica and I and Ruth also have wonderful dynamic together. So that's always kind of fun, right? So I hope that people will join in that too. We'll see that. We'll be experiencing that throughout the day. So, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. And we'll be waiting for you, Sebern.